Hey everyone, welcome into another episode of the Easter Pod. I certainly hope that everyone out there listening is doing well and staying safe. It's certainly not an easy time for most of us, and we are all having to figure out how to navigate our current situation with this pandemic, but I hope you are finding ways to remain hopeful and remain encouraged and stay connected as we all practice social distancing. And I hope that you're also finding ways to reach out to one another and offer assistance wherever and however you can during this crisis. Things are hard, but like we discussed in our last episode, we can take solace knowing that for all the difficulty we are currently facing, that we are all in this together and that we have each other's backs. I am very excited for you to hear today's conversation. I was honored to have Wess Daniels on the pod this week. Wess is a longtime friend, and our stories have a lot of overlap, as you'll hear, so it was really cool to chat with him. Wess is also the William R. Rogers Director of Friends Center and Quaker Studies at Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina, where he lives with his wife, Emily, their 3 children, and their 2 chickens. Prior to teaching at Guilford, Wess was a released minister at Camas Friends Church in Washington State, and he is also currently the founder and owner of Fireweed Coffee Co. in Greensboro, North Carolina, as well as the author of Resisting Empire, the Book of Revelation. He has done a lot of teaching, speaking, and writing on renewal of faith traditions, especially within the Quaker tradition, and we covered a lot in today's episode, not just about Wess's story, what he does, and what he's accomplished, but we get into some great discussion about our shared history and some broader discussion about faith in 2020. I know you'll really enjoy it, and like I said, I'm excited for you to hear it. Before we get into my conversation with Wess, I just want to thank you again for listening to the Easter Pod and give you a quick reminder that you can follow the Easter Pod on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and if you like the show, be sure to give us a rating, leave a review, and subscribe. And you can also find Wess and his work at gatheringinlight.com and at Fireweed Coffee Co. So be well, stay safe, remember to look for the helpers in the midst of this crisis, and without further ado, my conversation with Wess Daniels. All right, well, I am honored and overjoyed to have Wess Daniels joining me on the Easter Pod today. When I started the Easter Pod and thought about all of the great guests I wanted to have on, Wess was immediately someone very high on my list, in part because, as we covered going over his bio in our intro, Wess is someone with a ton of great wisdom and experience, and also because Wess and I have known each other for quite a while and have gotten to have some pretty incredible conversations over the years. So very, very excited to have Wess on today. Wess, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Easter Pod. How are you doing is the question, and more importantly, are you staying safe?
Yes, we're doing okay. I've got 3 kids and my wife. We're all at home and kind of holed up now for the most part. And so, day 2 feels like we might be able to make it to the end of the week without killing each other. I don't know, like past that, all bets are off. But I think remote work seems like a great idea as long as you don't have like kids at home with you. But so we're gonna put that theory to the test real quick.
Yeah, for sure. I wish I could say I can relate, but it's just my wife and I and our dog, so much different situation. How are your chickens doing? You have 2 chickens, right?
We do. We have 2 chickens. They seem like they're doing just fine. I don't think that they have the coronavirus or anything, so they're just sort of living their best lives.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. There's a lot of directions we could take this conversation today, and I certainly want to dig into some of the details of what you do and the work you've done. But just to get us started, I'd love to dive into your story and a little bit of how it intersects with mine. So even though I know the answer, I'll pose the question on behalf of our audience. How did you and I come to know one another?
Yeah, so I when I was a first time senior, I was a senior twice at Malone College, and I
Sorry,
started.
sorry, correction. That's Malone University.
Oh yes, that's right, Malone University. It was Malone College when I was there. That's how far back it was. Um, I had a professor named Herbert Damali who asked me what I was planning to do after I finished college, and I said, "Well, I'm thinking about going into pastoral ministry." And he said, "Okay, so good. I know you're going to be graduating soon. What are you doing for work right now?" And I said, "Well, I'm working at the Flaming Pit." And the Flaming Pit was not like a really bad, you know, metaphor for hell. It was a barbecue restaurant in Canton, Ohio. And so I was serving, waiting tables, doing service type stuff. And he said, "It seems like maybe it would be a good idea for you to work at a church just to see what it would be like to, see if it's something that you like doing before you kind of commit to it as a career." And honestly, that was the first time anybody had said that to me, and that thought had never occurred to me myself. So I started looking for work, and I like at that point in the theology department at Malone, there was like a binder, and it just had all these job listings, that from different churches and things like that. And so I just started going through it, and there really, I mean, this was a long time ago, but I don't really remember there being a good fit or many opportunities that were really what I was looking for, except for this one little church in Barberton, Ohio, called Barberton Evangelical Friends Church. And at that point, I knew that Malone had some relationship to Friends. I didn't really know that much about Friends theology or the Friends tradition, but I figured it was good. So I called up Brian Cowan, who was the pastor there, and I interviewed and got hired. And it was in that context that you and I met. Now, I don't. You might have to help me remember the specifics. It seems to me that we did an after school program, and our church building was right across the street from the middle school where you went at the time, if I recall correctly. And so I think because you weren't going to the church then, so we met some kind of in a program or something like that after school. Is that right?
Yes, I very much recall that. So this is where I come into your story at that time as you were taking that job as the youth pastor at Barberton Evangelical Friends Church. I was going to UL Light Middle School right across the way from Barberton Evangelical Friends Church, and I was in 7th grade, I believe, had just started and was very much struggling to make friends and find my footing as most middle schoolers do. So you can imagine my delight when I realized there was at the church across from the school that they were giving away free cookies and free
Yes.
pizza after school. That was very awesome. So good job getting kids in the door for youth group.
Well, and that was like, that was one of Brian's ideas was to really, we didn't really do any kind of programming at that time, like on the Wednesday thing. It was literally just kind of a safe place after school for kids to come hang out for a little while they waited for rides or they could do their homework. We always had cookies at the very least. We used to play all kinds of different games, and it was big. That was like at the height of Pokemon. So I remember there being a lot of kids who'd bring their Pokemon cards in, so it was really kind of almost kind of a drop-in type thing. And the cool thing is when I got when I got to Barberton, started working there, there were three youth, and One of them was the pastor's son who had no choice but to be there. And the other two were related to the other person who was leading youth group at the time. So it was, it was mostly very in-house. But when we basically just said, "Hey, we've got this community right next door. How do we connect with these kids?" and just kind of basically made ourselves available. Like, I mean, I don't know, I don't know what your impression is, but like looking back on it, I mean, we could have 20 to 30 kids there on a Wednesday. I mean, a lot of kids showing up. I mean, they had no relationship to the church community, but we were able to build relationships with, get to know folks, get to know their families a little bit, and and some people such as yourself, we actually got to build much longer, more meaningful relationships with. So that was pretty cool.
Well, I know I was certainly thankful for the work that you guys were doing at that time through the church and through the youth group because like I alluded to, that was a tumultuous time in life for me. So it was really cool just to have a safe place to come and be around kids my own age and do fun activities and eat free food. And really, even though I was somebody that had a context growing up for the church, I wasn't somebody that had really gotten plugged in a meaningful way outside of things like Sunday school or vacation Bible school, things like that. So it was just cool to have that opportunity to get plugged in. I'm just curious, and I think people that have been listening to me for 5 episodes now on the Easter Pod might be curious. How would you describe Corey Easter Day in middle school? And be kind.
Uh, an angel, an absolute angel. Uh, well, I mean, I think you were like every other middle school boy in that you were trying to figure out who you were and your place in this world, and you were going through particular challenges in family and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think that was those are the things that I recall. You were also very much like um, you were very eager. I mean, in terms of the youth group, I mean, you were definitely one of the kids who was there, ready to go, interested. I remember there was a good group of you middle school boys, specifically, Cliff and others who I could get you guys to do a lot of fun stuff. I mean, we could go do stuff, hang out. You were kind of always game to kind of try whatever. So I liked that. I remember one time, one of the things that's coming to mind. I don't know if you even remember this, but we did. I don't remember what the occasion was, but we had some. I would often try to come up with like activities. I hate planning activities for groups, and like especially like youth group activities. This was not something that came up in the interview, but like icebreakers and that kind of stuff, I'm just terrible at it. But at some point I realized like, well, middle schoolers in general love food, and, especially middle school boys. And so I got on this kick where I would come up with like games and activities where we would use food, kind of just like in all sorts of like really weird ways. And so I remember one time, Barberton is famous for its fried chicken, and we had fried chicken toss in the backyard of the meeting house there, and we would so I got like big buckets of Millich's chicken or something like that, and we'd like put put like hula hoops out in the yard, and we're like throwing chicken across the yard, and just kind of all sorts of ridiculous stuff that only people like you when you were a middle schooler would be game for and have fun with. So that's the kind of stuff I remember.
Yeah, I don't think I remember that in particular, but I remember doing a lot of fun stuff like that. And I kudos to you for finding creative ways to use that famous Barberton chicken. One of the things I do remember, however, and this is a little bit deeper and more meaningful, although the chicken toss was fun, I think this is a testament to, the fact that you and I are even talking today 15, 16, some odd years later, I think is a testament to what you were doing back then
Mm.
at the church to reach kids in the community and to create a safe space. And one of the memories I have that has always stuck with me is you showing up at my door one day with a basketball, inviting me to come play with you and some of the other kids in the youth group. And that was such a big deal to me because at that time, I didn't have many friends and I didn't have much going on. So having someone just that I thought the world of and idolize come to my door with a basketball and say, "Hey, you're welcome. You're invited. We want to hang out. We want to do something that I know you'd enjoy." That was a really big deal. And I, without getting too sentimental too early on in our conversation, that's something as you and I have talked and reconnected that I think I've tried to express to you how
Mhm,
meaningful
mhm.
those days were to me and how meaningful gestures like that were. So, kudos on you for building a safe space and kind of paving the way there for kids like myself to have hope, to see the potential in ourselves. A lot of time has passed since those Barberton and Friends youth group days. So if you would walk us through a brief timeline of your life since then. I know that's a good 15, 16 years. So maybe just kind of the major bullet points and maybe try to describe how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, well, for one thing, you're making me younger than I am because this was 2001, 2002, so it's almost 20 years ago. I don't want to get hung up on a couple years, but this was a long time ago, and I do think that as we've reconnected over the last couple of years, I've really appreciated the length of our relationship. So I guess I just wanted to point that out. I left Barberton Friends Church in '03 with my wife. My then Emily and I got married in 2001, and we moved to California. I went and did graduate studies at Fuller Theological Seminary, where I did my master's and my PhD in theology. And the nightclub, my youngest is going to bed. I went to seminary basically having, in a way, given up on the traditional church. Given up as in in all of my infinite wisdom of 23. But I just felt like it was broken and failing and, all those things that I think in a lot of ways I would still say today. But it, but I had given up in my own work in the kind of traditional congregation and had kind of set my mind on going to school to become a faculty member somewhere and teach theology. And while I was at Fuller, I fell in love again with the role of pastoral care and with the congregation. I had a professor. I don't know if I think I ever told you this. I had a professor there who I mean, a number of teachers there had a big impact on me, but this guy in particular challenged all of us, a classroom of seminarians, to not give up on the traditional church, and he basically said, like, don't assume that God is finished with a congregation just because it's older or because it's struggling financially or because there's only a few people there. Like, don't just automatically assume that God is done with that congregation. Go into that congregation assuming that God put that congregation there 50 years, 100, 200 years ago for a purpose and a reason, and to be there as a pastor and listen for what is it that the Spirit is calling that congregation to do in that community with those people and those challenges now, and there was something about that that really challenged me and kind of opened me back up to that possibility. I mean, in a way, that's what we were doing at Barberton was, okay, what does it mean to be the church here in this community and, across the street from this middle school and, but I had to kind of understand that for myself again. And um, so that kind of opened me back up. And when I was working on my dissertation at Fuller, I was working on my that research is really around how do you help renew and revitalize these congregations that have grown stagnant or have, for one reason or another, become disengaged or, maybe just not as vibrant as they once were. How do you think about how would you go about revitalizing those communities? And so that's really what my work was about. And I remember having this distinct experience where I was in the library typing away, reading some heavy philosophical or theological book or something. And I remember God doesn't speak to me very often, but when God does, it's usually kind of it's like a bucket of cold water, or it's like in some deep sarcasm. But it was essentially like, you're writing a book about, or doing research on revitalizing the church from the basement of a library. Like, don't you think you ought to be like working this out in a community? It was something to that effect. And it was sort of like, again, this is sort of like when I was at Malone, like it hadn't occurred to me. So I started looking and kind of made myself more open and available to going back into congregational work. And so we then moved up to Camas, Washington in '09, and I pastored a small Quaker meeting there where I absolutely 100% learned a ton, got schooled, but like in the most positive sort of way of getting schooled by that congregation there. And they helped me to understand what it means to revitalize and to do that work together in a way that brings folks along. And and then I was there for 6 years. And then in 2015, by that time I had 3 kids and my wife. We all packed up into our Toyota Sienna and drove across the country from Washington to Greensboro, North Carolina, where I started working at Guilford College and working within a Quaker-founded institution in a lot of ways around revitalization and what does it mean to revitalize our institution here, and to work with students and help them to understand what the tradition is about. So that's really kind of my journey in a short sort of way since 2003, when we were both in the same place the last time.
Yeah, and I must say it's been really cool since moving down to the Charlotte area to have the chance to reconnect, since you're just a couple hours up north in Greensboro, and hang out in person again. It's been really great. And thank you for sharing that summary of your journey up to this point. And I want to definitely touch on that idea you brought up of revitalization, especially as it applies to the church. But one question I had, kind of through the lens of our listeners and maybe someone that's not as familiar with the different traditions within Protestant Christianity as a whole, what is a Quaker? Can you describe what a Quaker is, what that tradition is, and how it's different from the other sects of Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, Quakerism is a part of the Christian tree in the same way that Catholic, Methodists, Mennonites are. It's a flavor of Christianity that got started in England in the 17th century, and really, the Quaker movement was anti or yeah, I mean, it was pretty much anti um, institutionalized religion, or what Richard Rohr calls bogus religion. And that is, in that moment in time, not unlike the time we're in now, but in a very different way, the church was in bed with the state. It in order to be a member of England at the time, you had to be a member of the Church of England. And in order to be a member of the Church of England, you had to be a citizen. I mean, these were coterminous, as they say. And that's and you had to pay a tithe as a tax. Everybody, no matter whether you were rich or poor, you paid to your parish a certain amount of money, and if you didn't, you would be imprisoned for it. And there's all these ways in which the church was a part of the state and run by the state and benefited from the state. And Quakers had no interest in that, and they had no interest in that because they were committed to the teachings of Jesus and what they called primitive Christianity revived. So for early Quakers, they were very serious about basically, and you'll hear this from other groups too, going back to the roots. And for them, that meant going back to the Sermon on the Mount, going back to kind of the core, what they understood to be the core aspects of Christianity. So living nonviolently, living in an egalitarian community, in a community where men and women were both able to minister. So there were women ministers in the Quaker tradition from the 1660s on. Quakers, early Quakers, and some Quakers still today do not have pastors. The early Friends did not have any clergy. And that was because they felt that you didn't need to have a pastor to hear from God because God is in our midst. And so instead they would meet in silence and they would wait for someone to be moved by the Spirit to share out of the silence and kind of give the ministry. So there was ways in which it was kind of less hierarchical. I don't want to say non, because there was still leadership, but it was less hierarchical than having a priest who was educated and could tell you what to believe, even if he himself didn't really believe it or he himself didn't really live that. And they were trying to get away from that kind of in their minds, a very hypocritical kind of understanding of Christianity, where you can profess something without, in their words, possessing it. And so they were trying to get away from that. So that's really, just scraping the surface. Quakers today, we're all over the world. The majority of Quakers are in Africa and Central and Latin America, Central and South America. And there's two main types of Quakers, those with pastors and those without pastors, basically. So those with pastors sing, have hymns and do, have more of a liturgy where there's prayers and singing and preaching and some silence shared together as a community. The communities without pastors just, they don't have that other liturgy. They meet in silence and wait for people to be led to stand up and speak out of the silence. So that's very, very brief description of Quakers.
Yeah, it's extremely helpful to hear that description of Quakerism and to better understand Quaker roots and how it was founded and what it's all about. Because for me, going to Barberton Evangelical Friends Church, that was my first experience with Quakerism, and we were led by a pastor, as you mentioned, the different types there. And during the service, we would have that moment of, it's not a moment of silence isn't the right term, but we would have that moment where we would wait on the Holy Spirit to speak through one of us, or people would share their concerns, or we would just have that time where we were trying to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. And I remember being really taken by that and really fascinated with it, and really loved the idea of Quakerism. Just the heart of it that I understood was that kind of removing any possible boundaries or barriers between us and God, just having the ability to directly commune with God and commune with the Holy Spirit and hear from the voice of God. And it seemed like God was so much more accessible kind of in that in how that tradition is grounded. And so when I got to Malone, that has Quaker affiliation, I was able to be exposed to and experience some more of the traditional silent meetings where there was no pastor. We would just sit all in the room together, and it was a true just waiting on the Holy Spirit. And that further fascinated me with Quakerism and what it meant to be a Quaker and where those roots were. And just the story of George Fox, being exposed to all of that at Malone at Barberton Evangelical Friends Church. That's why I found myself taken by it. Is it just seemed like every part of it was meant to bring someone closer, to have more access to God, or to rather empower people to the access they already had to God, and not put any boundaries or barriers in between us and God. So I guess my question for you is, why for you, why is the Quaker tradition one that you've chosen to focus your life's work on? What draws you to Quakerism? Why are you so passionate about it?
That's a good question. I mean, it's shifted over the years. And I think part of why I got into, well, I mean, I have this sense that I was adopted into the Quaker tradition when I was at Malone, and I was working at Barberton French Church, and I basically said, if I'm going to be working in this tradition, I ought to know something about it, and I started doing my homework, so to speak. And when I was reading about early Friends and their commitment to the poor, their commitment to justice and equality of all persons, and this kind of what you're saying, Corey, about like a more simple spirituality, one that is really in a way kind of where we strip away everything that encumbers us to just kind of this a very simple. I mean, there's nothing really more simple than sitting in silence with a group of people for worship, and reading about those things and seeing how they understood themselves to be a part of the story that Jesus had started, or and was promoting. I had this experience where I basically said, "Oh, this is what I am," and I didn't know it. It's like this gives the language to all of the experiences, or many of the experiences and feelings that I've had about faith. And I had no idea there was like a whole community and tradition that's articulated it this way. So that was kind of my way in. Quakers talk about it as convincement. And over time, it has changed and shifted as I've become more acquainted with the community. And there's often a distance between what you read in a book or what you read in history, and then when you show up to a place on Sunday morning, and it's like, wait a second, this isn't what I thought it would be, and so I've wrestled at times with my commitment to the Quaker tradition, and I keep coming back to one, the sense that I feel called to it. I do not feel as though God has somehow let me off the hook as a Quaker. There are times where I think, it looks so much easier over in that pasture, So I feel a commitment and a call. Another thing is that I love the depth and the breadth of the tradition. So, I was able to come into Quakerism as, more evangelical in my mindset, and, maybe more conservative in my politics. And it's broad enough and wide enough and global enough that I have shifted dramatically in my theology and in my politics and in my understanding of the world and in my relationship with humans and the created order. And I haven't like run out of road yet in the Quaker tradition. Like I'm still embraced and covered by that tradition. And so I think that, those two pieces, and then of course just the fact that I continue to, as you say, it is a part of my life's work to continue to contribute to and try to breathe life into the Quaker communities and tradition, to keep it alive, to keep it going. So I feel like I've put a lot of skin in the game, and yeah, so I think those are the things that keep me here, keep me connected. Besides just that, I have a lot of friends, and some of the best people I know are Quakers, and some of my most favorite people are Quaker folks who have been close confidant.
Yeah, you brought up that idea of revitalization earlier, and I wanted to come back around to that because I think one of the very popular things I've noticed in kind of Western evangelical Christianity, if you will, has been there's been a huge boom in the planting of churches, and I have a lot of friends that are church planters. Quite frankly, church planting was something I had considered for myself at one point as a possibility, and I think there are a lot of really great and positive aspects to planting churches, but because it's much easier sometimes to attach ourselves to the idea of starting something new, I think that we can, and I'm guilty of this certainly, overlook things that already exist. And what do we do with those churches that already exist? What do we do with congregations that have deep roots, that have been around for a long time? I think that's a question that is often raised or thought of. So,
Yeah.
what has been your practical experience with that idea of revitalization in the church? How have you seen it play out for you? I don't want to assume or make any guesses at how you've seen that play out or how you've experienced it. So maybe just share how you've seen that play out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said. I mean, I do think that there's nothing wrong with church planting, but I've always, or for have a long time, gone in this other direction, and that is, I think encapsulated in that concept of revitalization and kind of a reinvestment in what is already there. And I think that goes back to the story I was telling about at Fuller, and the kind of don't assume that God's given up on these people yet. Go and find out, and go and learn and journey with those communities. And I think there's value. There's obviously great spiritual value in doing that. I think there's also, for me, I need to be a part of something bigger than myself. And so that's why I am committed to, and I talk about the Quaker tradition, because that's something that I am an apprentice to. I am subordinate to it. I continue to try to understand it, learn from it, be shaped by it. If I were to just sort of go off and do my own thing, God only knows what would happen. So there's that sense of accountability and guidance. My experience with revitalization has been at Barberton Friends and some of the work that we did there to try to do some of that, and at Camus Friends, and then traveling around and speaking in congregations and meetings. And it looks different everywhere. At Barberton Friends, it was really very much about, I think both Brian and I had a deep commitment to the poor, to those who are disenfranchised and vulnerable, and felt like that's what the church ought to be up to. And so whatever we can do to be kind of engaged in the community in that kind of way, let's do it. So I think that's really, I got an early start there, probably under Brian's influence in a lot of ways, also under my own experiences growing up, poor working class family. In Camas, the revitalization was focused around getting out into the community, working with the poor. We started Laundry Love, which I know you've got a big connection to. So it was absolutely about turning outward and beginning to understand what is the context in which we are living now. What does it mean to be, in that context, we would say, what does it mean for us to be the Quakers in Camas? Because there are no other Quaker communities in Camas. We're in it. So, presumably God wants us here for a reason. What does it mean for us to be the Quakers here? And, we're not going to, we can't be the Baptists. We can't be the Methodists. We can't have the mega church. We're not going to do this and that. But the one thing we can do really well are be the Friends in Camas. And so what does it mean to do that? And that kind of turned us outward. And that has a revitalizing effect when you stop kind of thinking about your own survival, when you're not just navel gazing, when you're not so set on your own agendas, but you go out into the community and you find out what people in your community are dealing with, and you let them lead. You let them set the agenda, and you partner with them and you work with them. That has a revitalizing effect. The other part I would say is about really trying to go as deep into your own tradition as you can. So we often will say, or I'll often kind of, encourage folks to, like, a lot of times we kind of focus on the externals, right? Like, the things that look good, the things that, do we have a good sign up out front? Do we have, the best looking website, the best podcast? I mean, and I'm not opposed to those things. I like those things too. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, by the way. So, I mean, I do like those things. But do we know what our center is? Do we know who we are and what it means to be a part of this community? And if we know what our center is and we're clear about that, the boundaries will take care of themselves. We don't need to worry about that. I think, and so in a lot of ways, I feel like my work, especially at the college now, is very much about trying to, as we say here at Guilford, how do we apprentice people to the Quaker tradition? How do we go deeper into it? And then not in some kind of rigid, antiquated way, like, so now we're going to do everything that they did in the 1700s, but we're going to take that knowledge and then remix it in our own context and, use it, reuse it, recycle it for today. So I think that those are kind of the two impulses and maybe ways that I see revitalization happening. That kind of turning outward, and then that going deeper into your own tradition so that you can remix it in your community while you're out there interacting with folks, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love the way you described that. And as a fellow Enneagram 3 achiever, I am totally with you on doing whatever you can to get out there, turn outward, and really see what kind of impact that you're able to have in the community around you. I think that's highly important. And I thought it was really cool how when you and I reconnected as I got older, well, you got older as well.
Well, speak for yourself.
I thought it was really cool how when we reconnected as we both got older that we found out we each had involvement with the laundry project, aka Laundry Love, that whole concept of going out into the community, paying for people's laundry, creating a community environment, a positive community environment at the laundromat, bringing laundry supplies, all that kind of stuff. I just thought it was so cool that we hadn't talked to each other in so long and we were both involved with that. Can you
Yeah,
talk a little bit
that's
about how
awesome.
you got Yeah, it was awesome. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into Laundry Love, your experience with it, and just your overall passion for anti-poverty work?
Well, I mean, my passion for anti-poverty work starts from my own story and growing up in a poor working class family, um, and those experiences, divorced parents. My stepdad was in a really bad car accident in the early 90s, and then we basically lived on. There were six of us kids, and we basically lived on Social Security. For the rest of his time on Earth, until we moved out. He committed suicide in 2003 from, I would imagine, from depression and undiagnosed depression. Um, and so, you know, growing up in that with my mom and stepdad in that context, we got used to having our house be foreclosed on and then having the church pay our mortgage so we could keep the house, and working at the food giveaway, and then afterwards taking groceries home, because we needed food too, and having churches provide Christmas gifts and those sorts of things. And so for me, growing up, I always had a positive experience of the church. And one of the functions of the church was to take care of everyone, but especially those who were really insecure financially, economically. So that was really the beginning of that passion and understanding. And I would say that over time, it's only gotten stronger. I mean, as I read the scriptures, you have thousands upon thousands of texts where God is speaking about the poor in a positive way. The Bible is the only piece of mass media text we have in the world that speaks positively of the poor. You turn on any news outlet, any pick up any newspaper. The poor are always to blame. They're poor because they made some bad decision. They're just soaking up the system. This sort of thing. It's actually the Bible that says, no, God is with the poor. God is on the side of the poor. When people are poor, whenever God is angry and about to bring down all hell in the Bible, it is always about poverty. It is always about structural economic injustice and oppression of the people. And so, I didn't know that when I was experiencing those things growing up. I didn't know those stories that well, but I do now. so, so those are the kinds of things that kind of motivate me. And we got in love specifically with Laundry Love because, so when I moved to Camas, Washington, this was 2009. So this was like the Great Recession was taking place, and it was like 2000 summer 2009, if I recall, is like basically when it was like we were scraping the bottom of the economy. And I'm new in this town. I don't know anybody. I don't have any friends yet. I don't know any of the services. I can't call anybody up. And we're consistently getting people who are needing help. Food, gas, utilities. And there was a woman who came in. She said her name was Betty, and so she asked if she could sing me a Quaker song, and I said sure. And I mean she was very clearly really poor, most likely homeless, and she sang "This Little Light of Mine" to me as we stood inside the meeting house there. And it was sweet and beautiful. And then she said, would it be okay if I take a nap on the floor here? And I was like, no, you can't nap on the floor here. You could come and nap on one of the pews, but I'm not going to let you sleep on the floor in the foyer. Will you come into the sanctuary? So I walked into the sanctuary, and she took like a 3 or 4 hour nap. And in that time, she had said that, it's really hard to sleep at night because, you don't feel safe, and it was really cold and all these things. And in that 3 or 4 hour window, while she was napping in the sanctuary, this woman who was experiencing homelessness was sleeping in a pew, 20 feet away. I basically, I'd been in Camas for all of like 2 months at this point. I got on the internet, I got on the phone, and I just basically started my education around what were the social resources and where was the help in that community for folks like Betty. And that turned into, Quakers love committees. This is I didn't tell you all of the things about Quakers earlier. One of our favorite things was to have committees. So we started a task force. And for the next year or so, because one thing I found out basically was that as a church, we didn't know where to go to get help for Betty. And, and we were, our community was itself a predominantly working class community that was struggling financially and didn't have a lot of resources. And so we didn't know who to partner with, where to send her. And so we educated ourselves over the next year or so, this task force, and we participated in the homeless count. We would literally go around to different organizations, and we would do like appreciative inquiry type questions. So we would go to organizations and say, what would you say is like the core of your work? And, who, kind of get to know their constituency. And we would also ask, okay, who are other people you would say in the community who are doing the best work around these kinds of things? And out of that, and then we kind of had like a couple points where we got together and kind of reported out to the larger community. And I remember one of the last meetings of the task force was basically kind of laying out action steps and kind of a needs assessment of Camas. And there was a lot going on in Camas at this time economically, because you kind of had basically Camas was built on a paper mill. And so it had for up until the 90s been a paper mill town of about 3,000 people or so, maybe a little bit more. And then in the 90s, and I don't know exactly how, but in the 90s, like HP came to Camas, and then some other high-tech firms. And then it just exploded, in this kind of high-tech way where you had these really great jobs and like 10,000 square foot homes up on the lake that had like elevators in the middle of them. But, so people had jobs that could afford that kind of thing, but it wasn't the people from Camas. It was people from all over the world who were coming and buying those homes and working in those high-tech jobs. So it was development, but it wasn't fair development. It wasn't actually investing in the community. So we learned all kinds of stuff like doing this. And one of the things that we wanted to do as a community was like, what is one thing that we can do? What is one need we can meet in a very concrete way that will help us get out of our meeting house? So we're not making people come to us, and that we can build community with people. And I had met Greg Russinger. He was connected to Fuller. So when I lived down in LA, I met Greg, and Greg was the guy behind Laundry Love. And he had moved up to Portland in the time since we'd been up there. And so we got together, and so I kind of knew a little bit about his work. So we, as a church, basically had heard a number of times while we were doing this kind of research that, like, people kind of make an offhand comment like, if I had clean clothes, that would make so much difference for me. And just kind of in an offhanded way, but that's, we were just having conversations. People would say stuff like that. So we brought this up in this meeting, and we were kind of charged with coming up with, some response to that. So that's where we kind of pitched the laundry love idea. We knew it was already there, and so we approached the laundromat owner, and I wish I could tell you what year this was. I can't even remember now. It was probably the fall of 2010 maybe. I mean, it's still going, so they've been doing this for twice a month for almost 10 years now. In building relationships with people, it is one of the only things in the town. I mean, there isn't anything in the town like that. And it became kind of a hub. So there'd be people would come and do needle exchanges. People would come and do like social services. There'd be like, a group that worked with like homeless teens and to help them to get jobs, like job training. Like they'd all like plug in to our laundry love thing. It became this kind of like cool little hub for all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of a long story, but that was how we got into it. And I'm really, and I don't expect that they'll necessarily do it forever, but I'm really proud that they continue that, that work in that way still, even though I've been gone for almost 5 years now.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I really appreciate you sharing that story. It's very inspiring. I love it. I relate to it in a lot of ways personally, especially it's just so funny to me how much overlap you and I kind of have, or how many similarities we share, because it was fall of 2010 where, as a junior going into my senior year at Malone in Canton, Ohio, I came across the Laundry Project and started doing laundry events in
Awesome.
Canton. Yep. And it's just really cool. And for me too, it was similarly out of my own story of growing up in a poverty situation and wanting to just help other people that were struggling as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that story. And we definitely have a lot of overlap in regards to that as well. Where we don't have overlap is I have never written a book and you have written several, right? So your most recent book came out in 2019, Resisting Empire, the Book of Revelation. Can you give us a brief synopsis about what that book is about and why you felt compelled to write it?
I mean, Tim LaHaye made millions writing a series of books about Revelation. Why can't I try? No, I wanted to write a book about, it actually didn't start there. I actually did not want to do anything with Revelation at all. It was sort of like my Bible was like one book short. Basically, I'd kind of like written it off. And this was when I was still pastoring. I kind of had this. Are you familiar with Parker Palmer at all?
No, I'm not familiar.
He's a great author. He's got a book called A Hidden Wholeness that's been really impactful for me. And anyway, so I had an opportunity to go on a retreat with him, and he said that one of the things a comment he made was that he only writes books about things that baffle him. And, the things that kind of make him, that puzzle him, or that he feels resistant to in some way, not things that he feels like he already understands. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of approach. So when I was thinking about what I was going to preach on next, I thought, I'll try this kind of Parker Palmer trick and see what happens. And I thought, what's the thing I'd least like to preach on, And as soon as I said that, of course, I realized it was Revelation, and then I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I wanted to take it back. But then I kind of leaned into it, as I sort of wrestled with myself, and thought, surely there is, my association with Revelation is like end of the world. It's about predicting, all these like signs and symbols, and and it just tends to get pretty mean and nasty, and it's usually used against whatever group that church doesn't like. Whether it's people who are gay, or people who are liberal, or whatever the thing is. It's I remember in the 90s it was the Russian government, this and that. I mean, it's just all sorts of stuff. Credit cards, cell phones. So that was kind of my association. And I thought, surely there have been people who have done work on this that is different from that, and have another perspective. So that's essentially where I started to kind of look for, okay, who's saying the stuff about Revelation that isn't in the mainstream, isn't the Tim LaHaye kind of approach. And sure enough, there are lots of folks. And the punchline, or kind of what my book is really about, is a completely different reading of Revelation. It is not, it's not going to help you interpret the signs and symbols and what they have to do with Obama or Trump or Nancy Pelosi or whatever. The coronavirus does not show up in the book of Revelation. It's none of that stuff. Instead, I'm arguing in my book that Revelation is not about predicting the end of the world. It doesn't have anything to do with the end of the world. It is a letter from a pastor written to his people about how to resist the Roman Empire, how to not assimilate into or become like the empire, and how to essentially survive. And it's writing, this letter is to a marginalized group of people. These are Palestinian Jews. I mean, they're people who are living in the land of Palestine. They're Jewish people, or they're Jewish, of Jewish descent. They've become Christians, and they are essentially living under Roman occupation. And in many cases, their lives are in danger. Their lives are in danger because of their theology, because they believe Jesus is Lord, not Caesar. And Nero, who was the emperor shortly before Domitian, who was the emperor when Revelation was written, was known for burning Christians, in the middle of Rome. I mean, and we kind of glorify this, but this is like an empire that is attacking this marginalized group of people because it's threatened by them, because it doesn't buy into its ideology. And that's what Revelation is about. It's about how do these small minority faith communities resist empire in the first century. And if we start there and we realize Revelation wasn't written for us 2,000 years later, it was written for them, then we can actually, I'm sort of arguing in the book that then it actually can become useful to us, but in a very different way. So it really is looking at, both kind of how the first hearers would have understood it, and then what does it mean for us to resist empire? What does it mean for us as people of faith, to not become like the empire?
Yes, I love all of that so much, because theology class, first day, 101, hermeneutics 101, context is everything. And the book of Revelation is, as you described, arguably the most taken out of context book in the Bible, or one of the most taken out of context. And just, I remember learning that the concept of prophecy isn't necessarily prediction, as much as it is proclamation, and just the whole idea that the book of Revelation, as you said, was written for specific people in a specific place in a specific time, and how easy it is for us to take something like that and apply it to ourselves and read it through our own lens and our own biases. That's another theology 101. We all read the Bible with our own bias and perspective, and how easy it is for us to take something like Revelation and apply it to that. Incidentally, have you ever read the Lego Bible?
Oh, I think I have seen it actually, or I've seen the Minecraft Bible. I've seen one something like that. Yes.
Revelation in the Lego Bible is terrifying,
Oh
absolutely
yeah, I
terrifying,
can
because it's all the Lego Bible. For those who haven't seen it, is just pictures of the Bible with Legos. So it's all these Lego characters acting out scenes from the Bible, and Revelation is just terrifying in the Lego
Oh
Bible.
lordy.
So
Yeah, that sounds terrifying. I can only imagine.
yeah, but I'm glad you wrote a book like that, especially with something like the Book of Revelation. I think that's great. Since since you're my first guest I've had on to really discuss faith or theology, I had a general question regarding faith in 2020 in our modern era. I haven't really talked about this on the pod up to this point, but I would consider myself to be someone who has struggled to reconcile my understanding of who God is with my experiences as it relates to the modern day church of America just as a whole. And I find myself becoming more and more empathetic toward people who feel disenfranchised from the church. So I was just curious what you would say to someone like myself listening who has some framework for the church and faith and theology, because I am of the belief that in America in 2020 that you would be hard pressed to find someone who hasn't had at least some experience with faith or the church as we know it. But what would you say to someone who has had experiences, struggled to reconcile them, and struggled to find their footing?
Well, I mean, this is not an uncommon thing. This is, and in fact, I would say this is, most of the students that I work with, many of the staff and faculty. Um, so it's a conversation that we have all the time, really. I think for me, I'm not really interested in trying to convince people, or you in this instance of, one to come over to my side as if there was a side. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in trying to um, make excuses or kind of work um, work in a way that tries to diminish your experiences. I mean, all I can say is I I know that I believe you. I know that that's not only how you feel, but that's how many people feel. That's how I often feel. And I think that the church, where it is now, generally speaking, has become a part of what, in fact, what I talk about in the Bible, sorry, what I talk about in my book as the religion of empire. It has become, that thing that early Quakers were pushing up against that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. What they were kind of pushing up against and seeing as bogus religion is absolutely 100% what we're seeing now with, again, or maybe it hasn't stopped in our society. And I think part of that is because the church has not resisted empire. It has tried to become like it, has tried to benefit from it. We are complicit in it. So it's no wonder that so many people are disillusioned, And I mean, with with politics where they are now, and coming into an election, and with all the stuff with Corona, I mean, you see this playing out over and over again in terms of who the church is, what the churches are saying about, um, where they're lining themselves with candidates. I'm a big proponent of the Poor People's Campaign and active in supporting that. And I really appreciate that they remain bipartisan because their goal is to get basically poverty and poor people uh, into the national conversation. And so I like that to me, that's a different kind of approach than to just kind of acquiesce or worse, try to benefit from. So I think kind of naming that, and not just naming it, repenting from it where we can, challenging it where we can. Um, and, I think for me, I am interested in helping people find what they need to be whole, to have wholeness, and on their own terms, not on what I think that is, but so that folks understand that for themselves. And that, and then to begin to think about, we're not stuck with what we have. We can create that thing that we want to see in the world. And I really do believe that. And I think that's part of why I'm so animated by, kind of revitalization work and renewal. And because I really do believe that we can make what it is we need to move forward. And we're seeing this, even just one Sunday into kind of really serious coronavirus stuff in the United States, and many churches, I think those discerning churches that went online, closed things down, didn't put their people at risk, they're going to be beginning to think about, what does it mean for us in a new world, in a new, in these new challenges, to kind of rethink what it means to be church and community. And you don't have to, you don't, in my mind, you don't have to have that all worked out in terms of what you believe or don't believe, to be a part of community and to be able to kind of see that there's a need in my community and I need to address it. There's people who are hurting and I need to support them. To me, at the end of the day, that's what's most important, is what we're doing with our lives, what we're doing while we're here. And, I think the rest of it will work itself out.
Yeah, and I really love what you talked about in terms of community. Community is key. The times where I've had the best, most healthy church experiences were when I was able to really plug into community with other people and felt like the body of Christ, as I understood it, was really expressing itself in my life and then the lives of our immediate community. And I love what you talked about in terms of being the change you wish to see, so to speak, in the world. I've always been, as well as you, animated by that idea, and rather than be given to cynicism and apathy, which is so easy to do just in general in life, what can I positively do to take a step forward, or to either be the person I know I want to be, or to help different organizations and people achieve their full potential, which is, again, part of the work of revitalization, to bring it full circle. So I love what you shared there. So before we get out of here, to end on perhaps a bit of a lighter lighter note, talk to me about Fireweed Coffee Co., just what it is, why you're passionate about it, which before you get into that, I should say, I've had some Fireweed coffee and it is out of sight, my man. I love it.
I'm glad you like it. I love coffee, and I've loved coffee for a very long time. When I lived in the Northwest, that's, you learn how to roast coffee. It's what so many people are doing. So I learned how to roast it about 9 or 10 years ago, just kind of on the stove top with like a whirly pop. You kind of hand crank it, and I would make about 8 ounces at a time. And that would usually last Emily and I for about a week. And anyways, I just did it for fun. And then when we moved to Greensboro just doesn't have great coffee. It's got a pretty terrible coffee scene. So that was kind of disappointing. But I went through kind of a difficult time at work, and I needed something to kind of help my mental health, basically. And so I was sort of trying to figure out what I could kind of put myself into that could get my mind off of things that I was worried about and anxious about and struggling with. And so this, my coffee really became kind of my mental health project. And um, what I did was basically start, I just kind of called up there's a little local farmers market in town, about a mile from our house, and asked if I could, what it would involve for me to get a table there and start selling some coffee. And I was just going to sell bags of coffee, roast some and take it over there and have some fresh roasts for folks. And they didn't have any coffee service the week I was going to be there. There was somebody else who was doing it, but she was going to be out. So I brought the coffee. I brewed the coffee as well, and it had a great response. And I've been doing it for almost 2 years now. So I bought a roaster. For that first 5 or 6 months, I was literally hand roasting, 10 to 12 pounds of coffee on my stovetop with these whirly pops. I burned through 5 of them because, you're not really supposed to roast that much coffee with them. So I ended up being able to save up enough money from the business to buy a roaster. And so now I have a tabletop roaster that I can roast about 2 pounds at a time, which is a pretty good amount for me. So that's kind of that part of it. The thing, the other sort of maybe a bit more philosophical part of it is the fireweed is a plant. It's a wildflower that grows in volcanic ash. So there's a lot of fireweed that grows in the Pacific Northwest. It's a very beautiful flower. And it basically, when there is trauma or devastation to the land, fireweed is the first crop to come up, and it heals the earth and kind of reneutralizes the soil and kind of brings things back so other plants can come and grow. And so after Mount St. Helen, it blew up. Once everything, after things, a little time, fireweed was the first plant to come up. And so one of my friends, Seth Martin, who has a song about fireweed, it's a lovely song. I don't know if it's just his name or if others called it this too, but refer to one of the names for Mount St. Helen is Fireweed Mountain. So I really love that idea of, being a healing agent in where there's been trauma, where there's been devastation, and what does it mean to come in and to try to help heal things and move things along. So that's kind of the story behind the name. But the coffee is something for fun, and I love sharing it with people. And when I'm at the market, people don't know who I am. They don't generally know that where I work or much about me. I'm just the guy who roasts some coffee and brews coffee, and they come up, I give them a cup of coffee, they smile, they're happy, and they walk away. And I love that. It's just mini experience of sharing goodness with someone, in a kind of a light sort of way.
Absolutely.
A lightly roasted way.
There you go. There it is. And I would agree with the philosophical concept of fireweed being very healing and very revitalizing, because the times I've had it, it has definitely been that for me. Very, very much enjoyed it. So even though you're doing me a solid by coming on the Easter pod, I hope that you will pay me with a bag of coffee very soon.
Actually, I may just do that. You're going to need some coffee. The coffee's going to sell out. I just bought 200 pounds today of green bean coffee. So I'm banking on folks running out of coffee and then ringing me up. So this is my new business plan.
We're down to our last half a bag, so I definitely need some. You're 100% right. So tell us where we can find more on Wess Daniels. Tell us where we can find the book. Where can we find out about fireweed? Where do we go to learn about all of the incredible stuff you're involved in?
You can go to gatheringinlight.com. That's my website. That's really the kind of the hub. There's links to my books there down at the bottom of that webpage. There's even some free downloadable books. And then Twitter, I'm pretty active on Twitter at CW Daniels. And my fireweed stuff is active on Instagram at Fireweed Coffee Co. And there's also a website with that same name, fireweedcoffeeco.com. But yeah, basically the website or Twitter, hit me up there. If you have folks who are interested in ordering coffee, I do ship domestically. I don't ship internationally. And I will be shipping until I run out of these 200 pounds, and then we'll see what happens.
And all 200 pounds are coming to the Easter Day household. Heard it here first. Wess, I really appreciate you spending the time to chat with me, to maybe wrap it up on a sentimental note. As I mentioned earlier in the pod, you are somebody that kind of was a light for me early on, and I don't mean light in a cheesy way. I mean light in that I didn't have many positive older role models, and you were that for me at an early age, and so it's cool to see things come full circle and to have reconnected after all these years and see all the similarities of where our journeys have taken us. And I always super enjoy the times that we get to reconnect and chat and to be more on a peer level now, to be friends as you are and have not been my youth pastor for quite a while. So it's really cool to chat. And I'm very much looking forward to the next time we can hang out in person once we're all through this social distancing stuff, and hope that you will tell your family I said hi. And overall, like I said, I just really appreciate you coming on the Easter pod and chatting with me.
Thanks, Corey. I feel the same. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm really glad that we've been able to reconnect, and I think you're doing really great work, and both just am really excited to see what you're doing and feel a sense of connection to that as well. So keep up the good work. Keep up this great podcast. I will, eventually, when we're no longer distancing ourselves, we'll hang out again. But until then, don't forget to wash your hands.
Don't forget to wash your hands. That's a great note to end on. I appreciate you, man. Virtual hug, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you.